had a couple of questions building up in the chat. Tim, sorry you've been waiting a while, but if you're ready to unmute yourself, the floor is yours.
Sure, thanks for that. Good, thank you. I was just going to follow on from that interesting question from James and the conversation with Roger, because Roger, you mentioned actually about promoting, you know, the media work you did in the 80s. In the 80s, literally just up the road from where I am, I was sort of doing the same. I have to confess at the moment, I've discovered that I am actually an original Woogan.
A what?
A Woogan.
Okay.
Yeah, indeed. A Woogan, which is a new term that has just been coined in the advent of this coronavirus stuff knocking around. So a Woogan is a vegan who sort of bases their advocacy not on justice for animals, but on various, could be obscure and probably unresearched, either conspiracy theories or health claims or various anything else that hasn't got any science behind it. And likening to kind of hippy-dippy alternative lifestyle. It was very much me in the 80s. But unlike I wasn't an animal rights advocate in the 80s when I was vegan. I was more of a vegan advocate. I was one of the original kind of, what you might call a cupcake vegan, I suppose. Because we used to sort of promote veganism through food. That was our big deal. And we did actually steer away quite a lot from the issues, as we made a point of that. In fact, I remember being quoted as saying, "It's Bristol, we do parties, not issues." And so that's what we used to always have, a party and celebrate plant-based food. But of course, as we know, a lot of the animal rights, fundamental justice issues got lost in the post. And I very much agree with you about the need for clarity. Clarity and honesty, and I think that's the source of a lot of the arguments. You did indeed note that the last few years the main groups have been more promoting a more consistent vegan message. You mentioned it had to be dragged kicking and screaming. I mean, all that stuff 5 years ago with the Vegan Society and Francione and stuff. I do believe that we do have a bit more consistency. I think there's more honesty. I think people understand these words better. I think that's partly because of the work that the animal rights, genuine animal rights advocates have been doing to promote a steady, consistent, rights-based position, much like this show. And over the last few years, there's been quite a lot of work of that nature quietly going on. I think it's established a clarity. I think we have people who promote plant-based diets. We have people who promote veganism from a justice perspective. We have a lot of health experts now promoting plant-based diets, but there's just more honesty about the whole thing. And I think also some of the thing that's been replaced from the 80s, I think to be fair, it's a combination of some of the strategy coupled with some of the mainstream media, but it was very much a kind of misanthropic movement. And I think that's been replaced, but there's a lot more kindness in the movement, and that is coming to the forefront, especially in the last couple of months. And I think the kindness in the movement is an area that's been so missing. And that's an area that, so can I see both working? Or should the grassroots just be focusing on a solid rights-based message? I think the grassroots message is more diverse and can be doing a lot more because I think that promoting, say, for instance, a vegan or plant-based food fair without a rights-based message can be an incredibly effective tool, well within the grasps of a small grassroots organisation, as indeed we've seen over the last few years, hundreds of regional events come up, run by very passionate people, all of which have got very different ideas about animal rights, animal welfare, plant-based diets. But when you put them all together as a collective, and I think that's when I think as long as you've got the honesty, and you're clear, and you, as it were, stay in your lane. So as you mentioned, Roger, if you want to talk about animal rights, can we actually talk about rights-based animal rights and not car crash in and pretend to be, hijack a really good theory and ideas, and 50 years now of animal rights really development. I do believe, though, that we can have more than just a rights-based message running through the movement, as long as there's a clarity and honesty from the advocates who promote their work.
I mean, I think you said quite a lot of things that I said too, and my general position about the grassroots would be to try to give them autonomy, not least financial autonomy, and then they can decide for themselves what message to put out. You know, I would obviously encourage them to put a rights-based message out, but if they weren't willing to do that or didn't want to, then that would be fine. But it certainly would be a beneficial thing in terms of the argument that we're developing now, and also the emergence of animal rights. I'm not sure. You see, the thing is, I'm not quite sure there's been 50 years of
But at least since the early 70s, animal rights as a theory has been developed. But more, you know, that's a loose estimation. As opposed to veganism as a social movement, which, as you know, we've traced back. I mean, we're more focused on the post-war, end of the Second World War, as the growth of the birth of the vegan social movement. And although, of course, we know that predating veganism was people who were on plant-based diets, like Arthur Lynn, who went on a plant-based diet 20 years before the word vegan was even coined. And the social movement began to develop. So I suppose, loosely speaking, in the early 70s, we see the development of animal rights theory, animal rights position, which had been taken on and developed.
Well, again, I think I would probably quibble with that a little bit. I mean, I'd like to interrogate to the extent that an animal rights position has ever really been promulgated in the movement, and so that's been the problem, that we've got some often things that are called an animal rights thing because, as Tom said, you know, even Peter Singer's non-rights book has been peddled as the animal rights Bible in the movement, and that it was actually called that. It was actually called that, and so there's been a lot of confusion, I think, and you know, it's a real shame to me that Tom Reagan didn't get a kind of better run at it. It's a shame that he was a little bit too old for the internet in a way, and the biggest shame is the shame that the movement should feel about its terrible treatment of Reagan, because essentially it kind of marginalized or silenced the rights-based position to the extent that Francione has left the movement and now just kind of shouts from the sidelines, totally irrelevant character, really, you know.
Sadly so, yeah. Sadly so.
Well, I think some people would celebrate the fact that you know, that divisiveness of Reagan and Francione, and don't forget they used to work together at one point, and but they were always described as divisive, and basically that's because they wanted the animal rights movement to stand up for animal rights, and so that was always the fundamental problem for Reagan and Francione, and for Reagan and Francione when they worked together, that they wasn't able to kind of break free from kind of a welfare quagmire